Hello and welcome to the first Giga Gamers video review for Battleforge. This is a very unique online free-to-play RTS with the little trappings of MMO and collectible card games mixed in. It's a bit of a unique blend, so let's jump right in and see how it works. Here we see the menu screen. This is the best menu ever because it has dragons in it. It's called the Forge and it essentially allows you to summon units whenever you want outside of the game. It's quite nice. You can make them fight each other, test out combos, and just see what your units look like in the first place. On the left here, we have the list of cards. Now, regrettably this game is microtransaction powered, and this is probably its main weakness. It won't cost you a huge amount of money if you decide to get a fair amount of cards, especially if you do what I don't do and stick to only having one or two decks. As it is, I have a ton of cards, and even that didn't cost me that much by just carefully buying up boxes at the right moment. So, there are four colours of card, and three kinds: units, buildings, and spells. Units are, like this guy you see before you, things you can summon to actually move around and fight on the battlefield. There are four sizes, aka types of unit: small, like these archers here; medium, like this guy; large, like this guy, the Vileblood; and extra large, like our friend the dragon. In addition to that, there are buildings, like towers, which you can use to defend strong points, or in the case of this thing, the Banner of Glory, support your units. And then finally spells, which can cast healing auras or large explosions, as the case may be. You've also got access to control spells and other interesting effects, which allow you to mess with either your own guys or your opponents in various unique and interesting ways. So this is much more like an MMO than most RTSs you'll have played. The game generally espouses this with dungeon-like level layouts and a card upgrade system that sees you collecting rewards from playing missions to make your cards incrementally slightly better. But we'll get to that. So, I'm just going to use this deck that I built here. So each deck is made of 20 cards, and you can put any mix of units in that you like. The catch is, of course, that you won't necessarily be able to summon all of them in combat. To unlock the tech tree, you build what's called orbs. Orbs are built on specific points on the map called monuments, and you will typically have between 1 and 4 of them, each of a specific colour. A card, like for instance these Windweavers here, will have a number of orbs shown in the top right that is required to actually enable you to summon the card. So these Windweavers need 1 green orb. This guy, a mutating maniac, needs 1 green orb, 1 red orb, and 1 orb of any colour, making him a little interesting. And this goes all the way up to, cards requiring multiples of the same colour orb, like this Fire Dragon here, which needs 3 red orbs, and is a tier 4 unit, meaning you have to be playing pretty heavily red if you want to use him. So, let's see how the game actually plays. I'm just going to do the first mission of the campaign on the standard difficulty. So this mission is fairly straightforward. You move from area to area, clearing out enemies as you go. It's a bit like a dungeon in an MMO. It's not enormously complicated or special, but it's a good introduction to how the game works and gives you a few varied battlefields, including a boss at the end. Later missions are much more complicated, including missions where you're working with up to 12 other players, or a mission where there's 2 players fighting in the present and 2 players fighting in the past, however the hell that works. It surely confused the hell out of me when I played it. So, here we are in the map. You can see that we've got a pretty gorgeous visual style here, a little bit stylized, a little bit artistic, and some very delineated map layouts. The game as a whole follows this, with maps made up of pathways rather than large open spaces as you see in most strategy games. Right here in front of me, I've got 2 power wells, which are basic resource generators, and a monument with no orb on it. When I summon a unit, because this is my first monument, the orb will automatically match itself to the colour of that unit. So first, I'm going to summon a Shaman. Shaman is a medium unit. He's not much of a fighter, instead he will heal my guys for me. As it is, he's going to wander off and try and heal some NPCs up there. I'll just let him for the time being. Summon someone else to accompany him. And then let's build some archers. These archers are called Windweavers, and they're a pretty solid unit, pretty basic. I'll grab 3 of these, move them up to complete my first sort of mini objective, which is kill this massive horror that's currently threatening these friendly guys. So the Shamans are actually keeping them alive, which is quite rare. Before I go on, I'm going to build this power well spot on the left. Power wells obviously cost power to build, but pay for themselves in a few minutes, as you'd expect. If you destroy them, the power is lost, which is a bit unfortunate. So protecting them is quite important in PvP. So I'm just going to kill these guys as they come in. Archers are going to make short work of them from range, and any damage I do is abruptly healed. Oh look, some more guys have appeared from beyond the Fog of War. Battleforge is interesting in that it only has Fog of War in PvE. In PvP you can always see the entirety of the map, including your opponent's units, at any time. The challenge, and the secrecy, comes in not knowing what your opponent has in the rest of his or her deck. So, if they start with some Windweavers, you might assume they're playing nature, but, you know, they might not be. For instance, in this deck, I'm about to build a red orb, not a green orb, so I can get access to units like Firestalkers at tier 2. And you have to be prepared for this eventuality. Each of the 4 colours has its own unique playstyle. Fire is all offensive, damage, with lots of explosion spells, cheap, high damage units and so on. Nature is about synergy and healing with very expensive units, but that can last you a long time on the battlefield and are generally very effective. Frost is all about defense, with cheap throwaway units that tend to take a long time to kill for their price. And finally, Shadow is all about tricks and self-sacrifice, with some incredibly clever abilities that require a lot of skill to pull off, but can be devastating when used correctly. So, my Fire Orb has just finished building, and I'm now effectively on tier 2. As you can see at the bottom here, a whole host of new cards of various different colours have just unlocked. So I've got access to red cards, green cards, and cards that are a mix of both, like this Vile Blood. In addition, I've also got access to a legendary card. Legendaries require orbs of no colour and can be used essentially anywhere, but you can only have one of them on the battlefield at any time. They're essentially special characters. This one is Viridia. She projects a healing aura. So I'm going to summon her right now because she keeps guys alive quite well. As well as that, I'm going to summon a couple Firestalkers. These guys are actually quite a clever unit. They have a dual mode, and you can switch them such that they become long-range siege units. So I'm going to do that right now. Quite a lot of units have special abilities in this game. It's kind of a forte of it. Most units are, they have fairly simplistic stats. In fact, each unit only has 2 numbers, its health and its damage, as well as its unit type and damage type. But most of them, to make up for that, have some sort of special rule or additional effect that makes them more effective or more interesting. In this case, the Firestalkers can turn into these little long-range siege weapons that are more effective against buildings, or they can switch back to their normal forms and become faster moving. So, now that I've finished destroying the spawn building, I'm free to build this next power well, and I'm going to first move down and attack this next area. There we see another spawn building, Joy of Joys, which my Firestalkers are happily engaging from extreme range, because they're like that. So most fights in Battleforge are conducted over pretty close range. There are very few things that can outrange units like the Firestalker. So this sort of 50-meter range tends to be the maximum in most situations. There are some heavy artillery units that can fire hundreds of meters across the map, but they generally require, like most things, friendly units to be in the area so you can position the target. Summoning is actually the same. You can summon units anywhere on the map that is near a friendly unit. You don't actually have to summon them near your power wells or your monuments. If you do, however, they suffer from summoning sickness, which makes them less healthy and less powerful for 10 or 15 seconds. It's not a huge debuff, but it essentially balances out the advantage that an attacker might have, where they can continually reinforce a combat until they win through sheer attrition. In this case, handing the advantage to the defender of any power well or monument, because they'll have a base building nearby, and their dudes won't suffer from summoning sickness when they're built. So it's going to take me quite a while to build up the 250 power I need to build this next monument, because monuments get more expensive as you go on. So I think I'm just going to move this way a little and start clearing out a few units on the way. So I think to finish this fight, I'm going to cast Lava Field. As you see, that just I click a card in the bar, I click an area on the battlefield, some power is spent, and boom, spell. Spells are generally very quick to go off, very much instant effects, and can be quite powerful. In this case, it very much turned the tide of the battle. Unfortunately, a couple of my shamans have died, which isn't very fortunate. So to slow these guys down, I'm going to use a crowd control spell, which turns them into pigs. Always good for a laugh. They will stay as pigs until they're attacked, at which point they wake up after a few seconds. But as you can see by their health bars, the delay was enough, and they're now dead. Finally, there's a Twilight Hag encroaching on my position. She needs some shooting because she's capable of scattering my guys around. So I'm going to drop a heal spell to keep my Windweavers alive while the Firestalkers shoot at her from range. As you can see, the game offers you pretty simple tactical choices. It's the combination of them that makes the game interesting. And the learning of timing the best when and where to use these special abilities. Interestingly, in multiplayer games, you can cast spells near your friend's units, meaning you can heal his or her units on their behalf if they don't have the power for it, if they don't have the cards available. This produces some very interesting dynamics where one player attacks and the other player supports, and then they switch around where the first player then goes back on the offensive. So here I'm going to build a second fire orb, because I need 3 in order to unlock my mighty fire dragon, and move back to where I was before in order to finish clearing this second area. So Battleforge tends to run on this rather neat system of counters and counter-counters. Every unit, as well as having a type, which is generally its size, small, medium, large, extra large, also has a damage type, which is built into their basic stat line, the basic damage value. And against that, this damage type essentially names a type of card. Mostly a creature type, but sometimes it can be buildings as well. And against that type, you then gain a 50% damage bonus, which is quite significant. In this way, it's not game breaking if you don't have the right cards to counter exactly what your opponent has at any particular time. But it does very much emphasize the player versus player combat on quickly bringing out units to counter whatever your opponent has at the right time, making it a very dynamic, engaging affair. Because there's no base building, combat is very immediate, and the forces that go into a combat can be completely different, and usually are, from the forces that leave it. So I'm just going to finish clearing off these ambushes here, such as they are, and build another power up. So we've got some support characters now, telling me what's what, and essentially laying out the objective for the next area. Essentially, I have a choice now. I can build this wall here, for which I'll have to have units nearby, which will erect essentially a defensive fortification between me and the opponent. Like so. If I build the wall, I can even put archers on top of it to defend it. The other option is that I'm allowed to move forward into the area currently hidden by all the fog of war up above and attack, which is probably what I'm going to end up doing. I do now have a large amount of time to essentially sit and build an army. So I'm going to pause the recording, spend a while, build a big force, and then I'll come back and explain it all when I'm done. Hello again, and we're back. And this time, I suddenly have an enormous army. So, I'll explain each bit in turn briefly. On the left here, we have some magma hurlers, who throw balls of lava made from their own bodies. In the center, we've got some mutating maniacs, the big blue, yellow, spiky, horrible things, backed up by the mighty Brack, another legendary unit. This is our first extra large unit that we've seen so far, with the other guys being large, and you can see he visibly towers over them. The size differences are quite visible. On the top right here, we've got some virtuosos, who are anti-large units, with big horns which they can blow to debilitate structures. Finally, we've got the army I had earlier, with the little firestalkers, archers, and our resident healer. So, rather than opening the gate in the wall, I'm actually going to destroy it. Not only to get it out of the way, but also to reclaim the power I spent on it, which goes back, gradually trickles back into my pool in a neat little mechanic called Void Power. This essentially means that if I lose my entire army in a fight, I'll actually be able to recover fairly quickly. It's a very nice mechanic and balances out the game pretty well. So, I'm going to move up and begin the onslaught. Let's go this way first. There are actually quite a large number of enemies in this area, so my hope is to keep my army together and smack them down one by one. Letting them all get distracted by the Twilight Hulk will probably not be a good idea at that. But let's roll with it. So, I'm going to select Branakern here and use his special ability. If you can see in the midst of all that massive amount of units there, he's just started glowing red. And this essentially means that he applies a large amount of damage to enemy units in the vicinity. Combined with the damage my army is already outputting, this is quite something. On to the next area. We've got a tower to clear, and some little dudes. which I'll aim my magma hurlers at. So if you can see on the top left here, I've got a nice little toolbar that essentially shows me my control groups and which units are in them. Not only can I assign units to control groups pretty easily by simply summoning next to existing control groups and relying on the game's auto-grouping algorithm, which actually works really well. But on top of that, I can manually drag and drop them in this bar, as well as simply using the control and number system that is common in RTSs. It's a pretty good detail of the interface, and actually much appreciated. Once you realize it's there, you start realizing how handy it is. I'm just going to send Brannock to trash this building, and I think I'll put the Virtuosos and his bodyguard into this tower here. So having destroyed the main spawn building, this should help prevent enemies from reoccurring. What have we got left? Right, having cleared this area, I think I'll build a power well. Move these up here. Really attack that tower. Up here we see an air unit. So there are certain, it's dead now, but there are certain units in Battleforge that actually fly over the ground and can only be attacked by ranged units or melee attacks from XLs, such as this guy, because XLs are tall enough to just swat flyers and dragons out of the sky. It's quite rare to see a fantasy game with air units in it. It actually makes the game a little more interesting. It fits. The game does pull it off quite well. The fact that some of them are awesome looking dragons, I can hardly complain at. So now I'm building my third fire orb, which when it constructs I'll be able to use to build a fire dragon. And I think I'll do that before moving on to the next area, simply because fire dragons are awesome. Voila! Dragon. Now I have an air unit. Fire dragons have an interesting little rule called Rage, which essentially means they start off with a very mediocre damage stat, but the more they do this, the more powerful they get. If they don't fight for a little while, their damage output drops back down. It's quite a common red mechanic, and is just another example of little interesting special rules that Battleforge throws on its units. In this respect, it's actually quite like card games. Card games tend to have a few simple rules for each unit that are fairly general, and Battleforge is no exception to that. So each unit will have usually between 0 and 3 or 4 little tweaks that make it unique. And they've done a pretty good job of differentiating the different factions and multicolour units and so on over the course of 3 or 4 expansions and what now numbers a few hundred cards. So up on the hill, we're going to encounter a boss. This guy is a Wrathgazer. The general tactic to beat this guy, as Viridia is currently explaining to me, is to send in melee troops to distract him, while everything simply pounds him dead. The reason is that he summons these little spirits, and spirits, when they reach him, give him spells, which are quite dangerous. Now, to beat this guy, I'm going to need some bigger units. Unfortunately, I'm actually reaching the unit cap, so it's time to delete my archers and my firestalkers, which is a shame because they serve me well, but they're a little useless here. In their place, I can have another dragon, which I think is a pretty good trade. The game usually features boss battles at the end of single-player maps. As I mentioned earlier, the PvE maps are very much laid out like dungeons in an MMO. You start at the beginning, you move between area to area, clearing out opponents as you go along. It's pretty simplistic to begin with, but can get very complicated. And they play around with the mechanic and the structure in some very interesting and unique ways, including teleportation and the aforementioned time travel mission, which is really mind-bending. To supplement my forces, I'm also going to summon a fireworm. So the game has a few of these massive worm units, and they look and feel really unique. They have the ability to bowl enemies over as they move, by simply diving up from beneath the earth and sending them flying. So the game, as you can see, has a lot of very unique and creative creature designs, which is part of its appeal. I think I have enough now, so I'm just going to send this stuff in and start hitting on this guy until he dies. So he's got a disintegration attack, and he will start lasering down the first thing he sees. Disintegration tends to remove units from the game quite easily unless the attack is interrupted. So that the mutating maniac that the Wrathgazer is disintegrating is now no more. Fortunately, my fire dragons are doing their job, and just to make sure my guys are okay, in case of any spells. I'm going to drop a Regrowth, which is a big healing spell. Because I can, I think I'll summon some units directly into combat, which is a nice thing this game can do. And he's done. Fire Dragons do their job, and the mission is complete. Just have to wait for these NPCs to walk past me, and then I can get my rewards. So the PvP in Battleforge, as a general rule, is very different from the PvE. It's very rapid, very dynamic. Much more of an emphasis on this countering. And matches between different skill levels of players can be quite harsh. In fact, like it takes a long time to master this game. So if you come up against someone a lot better than you, like with most RTSs, you'll find yourself quickly outmatched. The upshot of that is that learning the game is really rewarding and fun, and even getting the hang of the ins and outs in just 1 or 2 units can give you quite a big advantage and quite a lot of fun on the field of battle as you wield this thing you've suddenly turned into a mighty fighting force. So, I've got my rewards. I've got 2 upgrades for 2 cards that I happen to own, and I also happen to own the upgrades already, so they've just been converted. Oh no, wait, I actually don't own this one. So the second upgrade I don't own, and I can now apply it to one of my cards, which is quite nice. I'll just show you how that works. If I go into this upgrades menu, scroll down to the bottom, I'll see my brand new glaciation upgrade. And in this menu, I can pay a little gold to not only apply the upgrade to the card, but also combine a spare card with the upgrade to increase the number of times I can summon this spell in game before it starts a long cooldown. So even if the upgrades are generally fairly small, but the fact that you can then increase the number of charges, as it's called, you have on a card is also quite significant. In addition to this, the game also gives you a small amount of in-game money if you play the game just for 15 minutes in a day, and sends you an email notifying you of this fact. And then you can go in the marketplace and, hey, buy yourself a random common card for 1 Battleforge point. Which happens to be Shield Building, a nifty defensive spell that in fact happens to be one of the free-to-play cards. So, I think that wraps up my my video review of Battleforge. Hope to see some of you on the field of battle someday, and thank you and good night.